On the evening of December the 2nd, 2020, a man was found dead under mysterious circumstances aboard a private jet en route from Italy to Dubai. The man was Raza Hashimi, an alleged mastermind behind one of the most sophisticated financial networks funding Hamas operations. His death would ignite an international investigation, as governments scrambled to understand how a man who had been hiding in plain sight could suddenly meet such a violent, mysterious end. Flight EZ-1046, bound for Dubai, would become the backdrop for an operation that seemed to have unfolded like a thriller. A death in midair, leaving behind only questions. Who was responsible? Was it a hit job? And most chilling of all, why now? As the plane's wheels touched down in Dubai, an unsettling silence lingered over the passengers. The flight crew, unaware of the impending tragedy, had been alerted only moments before they made their descent. Yet by the time the authorities boarded, Hashimi's body had already been discovered in his seat, lifeless and cold. The immediate response from authorities was swift but disjointed. Was this simply a natural death, or had something darker occurred? Even as security footage from the airport emerged, one thing was certain. Hashimi was no ordinary passenger, and his death was no accident. Yet, beneath the surface of this seemingly isolated event, a larger mystery was unfolding, involving covert intelligence agencies, international conspiracies, and a tale that would span continents. The circumstances of Hashimi's death were about to open a Pandora's box of secrets, none of which would stay hidden for long. Raza Hashimi's death was not just a case of one man's life snuffed out. It was a signal flare in the dark, illuminating a high-stakes game of espionage, terrorism, and shadow warfare. Hashimi was no ordinary businessman. He was an architect of one of Hamas's most lucrative and dangerous financial operations. From his base in Italy, Hashimi had been printing counterfeit currencies and facilitating complex money laundering schemes to fund militant activity across the Middle East. The implications of his demise were far-reaching. The world's most powerful intelligence agencies were left to wrestle with a haunting question. Was Hashimi killed because of his ties to Hamas? Or was there a deeper, more personal motive behind his death? The global stakes were immense. Israel's Mossad, the intelligence service known for its precision and ruthless effectiveness, had been tracking Hashimi for years. Hashimi had eluded capture, always staying one step ahead. But Mossad's relentless pursuit, bolstered by highly classified methods and cutting-edge technology, had finally zeroed in on him. Was this operation just another chapter in their covert war against Hamas, or had a more calculating geopolitical strategy been set into motion? The unexpected death of this key figure was more than just an intelligence success. It marked a dangerous turning point. As the days passed, international intelligence agencies began to piece together fragments of information that pointed toward a coordinated operation. But why had the Mossad waited until the final moments to strike? And why on this flight? The answers seemed to be buried in a labyrinth of deception, and only a handful of players knew the truth. Who was behind Raza Hashimi's death, and why did it happen in the most unexpected of places, a plane soaring over the Mediterranean? Was this simply a well-executed assassination, or was there something far more insidious at play? Could it have been a rogue faction within Hamas, seeking to silence one of their own? Or was it the orchestrated hand of a foreign intelligence agency, perhaps Israel's Mossad, renowned for its covert operations? Why now? Why had Hashimi, a man who had managed to escape numerous previous attempts on his life, finally been cornered in such an abrupt and untraceable manner? Hashimi's death was not just about the man himself, but the broader web of influence and power that his role in Hamas had represented. Was he a pawn, moved around in a larger chess game, or had his assassination been ordered to send a message, one that reverberated through the corridors of power in both Israel and the Arab world? The operation had been flawlessly executed, but the bigger question was whether anyone could truly escape the invisible forces pulling the strings behind the scenes. With a life taken in cold blood, questions hung in the air, unanswered and chilling. The truth, it seemed, would remain buried until someone, some agency, was ready to reveal it. Raza Hashimi was born in 1977 in the northern provinces of Afghanistan, amidst the backdrop of a country torn by war and ideological conflict. His father, a former military officer with ties to the Soviet-backed government, was a staunch nationalist who had witnessed the brutal upheavals that followed the Soviet invasion in 1979. The Hashimi family was no stranger to political tension, having endured the ravages of war and the shifting allegiances of rival factions. Growing up in Kabul, young Raza was steeped in the rhetoric of resistance, a child shaped by the complexities of tribalism and revolution. He came of age during the rise of the Taliban, witnessing the collapse of the Soviet-backed regime and the chaotic birth of a new extremist order. His mother, a reserved and pious woman, often reminded him that the world beyond their modest home was rife with both opportunity and danger. From an early age, Raza's ambition had been clear. He sought power, influence, and the ability to command respect. But, like many in his generation, he was also deeply scarred by the loss of family members to the ravages of civil war. It was this profound grief, combined with a sense of injustice, that would set the stage for his eventual radicalization. Despite his parents' wishes for him to become a doctor or engineer, Raza rejected these paths. He was drawn instead to the growing movement of Islamic militancy that spread across Afghanistan, seeking strength in its ideology of revolution and retribution. His initial involvement was through local resistance groups, where he quickly earned a reputation for his charisma and cunning intelligence. However, his early years were marked by an inner conflict between his desire for power and his philosophical beliefs about justice, which were often influenced by the tales of jihadists who had fought against the Soviet invaders. It was in his teenage years, at the height of Afghanistan's civil war, that Raza would experience the violent path that would define the rest of his life. His father's brutal execution by a rival faction left a permanent scar on him, a wound that would drive him deeper into the shadows of extremist ideology. It was then that Hashimi decided that there was no turning back. Power, he believed, could only be attained through violence, and violence was a language he would master. Raza Hashimi's ideology was a volatile blend of personal vengeance and radical belief, born from years of living through the devastation of war. His views on justice were shaped by the harsh realities of his upbringing, his father's death, the loss of family, and the chaotic environment of a country ripped apart by foreign invasions and internal strife. To Hashimi, the world was divided into two clear factions, the oppressed and the oppressors. His role, as he saw it, was to be a liberator for the oppressed, even if that liberation came through ruthless means. He believed in using any means necessary to overturn the political and economic systems he viewed as corrupt and imperialistic, systems that were upheld by the West and Arab monarchies in his eyes. His personal quirks, however, added a layer of intrigue to his character. He was known for being meticulous, obsessively organized to the point of near paranoia. Hashimi kept detailed journals of his daily routines, meticulously tracking every interaction, every phone call, and every movement. His belief in discipline extended to every area of his life, including his daily workouts, which were as intense as his strategic planning. While he often portrayed himself as a man of calm reason and determination, those closest to him noted his sudden bursts of temper, especially when discussing the perceived betrayal of Islamic ideals. Hashimi's wardrobe, too, was carefully curated. He favored dark, understated suits, with no excessive adornments, a stark contrast to the more flamboyant figures in the terrorist circles with whom he associated. This subtlety served him well in blending into Western society, where he operated as a ghost, unseen, unnoticed, yet always lurking in the shadows, moving between various European capitals. His ability to slip in and out of high-profile meetings without drawing attention was one of his many strengths. Throughout his rise in the shadowy world of terrorism and financial crime, Raza Hashimi had earned several nicknames, each reflective of his multifaceted persona. To his associates in Hamas, he was the Ghost. This name was not just a title, but a testament to his ability to remain unseen, operating with chilling efficiency behind the scenes. In clandestine circles, his name evoked fear and respect. His operations were executed with the precision of a phantom, disappearing before anyone could trace his involvement. To the media, he was the money man, the unseen financier whose web of financial crimes enabled the terror network's deadly reach across the Middle East. To his enemies, however, he was the Scorpion, a dangerous and unpredictable figure, capable of striking without warning. This nickname was a reflection of the ruthlessness with which he pursued his objectives. Those who crossed Hashimi rarely lived to tell the tale. Whether his associates in the militant world or his adversaries in law enforcement, Hashimi maintained an aura of calculated invincibility. At his core, Hashimi's self-image was that of a revolutionary leader, a visionary working to reshape the Middle East's power structures. But his vision was dark and fraught with violence. A leader not just of a militant group, but of an ideology that justified extreme measures for a perceived greater good. Raza Hashimi's transition from a disgruntled youth in war-torn Afghanistan to a key figure in global terrorism was marked by pivotal moments, each one steeped in both personal tragedy and political manipulation. His first taste of militancy came in the early 1990s, during the rise of the Taliban. Though still a young man, Hashimi joined various militant factions, quickly rising to prominence due to his ability to manage logistics and resources. However, his entrance into the world of formalized extremism began with an alliance to a group that would become central to his rise: Hamas. The shift from Afghanistan to the broader Middle Eastern political arena was facilitated by a complex network of connections within the Islamic fundamentalist movements that had spread throughout the region in the 1990s. Hashimi understood that to truly wield power, he needed to be more than just a fighter. He needed to infiltrate the global financial system, and this realization led him to develop his counterfeit money operation, a far cry from the battlefield, but no less effective. His criminal activity was not merely about financial gain, it was about strategically sustaining and empowering militant organizations like Hamas. By the early 2000s, Hashimi was operating in Europe, where he became a central figure in Hamas's covert financial network. Through a combination of complex money laundering schemes, counterfeit currency production, and arms smuggling, he funded operations that brought terror to both Israel and its allies. But it was not just about the money. It was about the ideology he carried with him, one that justified violence as a necessary means of resistance. With every operation, Hashimi's belief in his cause solidified, and his status among militant factions grew. His ability to remain elusive, blending into the international financial systems while orchestrating chaos, made him a ghost, an invisible force that shaped events from the shadows. Hashimi was not just a foot soldier, he was an architect of the new wave of terrorism. Hashimi's criminal activities began in the late 1990s, when he first allied himself with local Afghan warlords and various militant factions. However, it was his transition to Europe that marked the beginning of his more calculated criminal operations. Initially, Hashimi was involved in small-scale arms smuggling, assisting militant groups with acquiring weapons through underground networks. But his true ambition was always more grandiose. As he moved through Europe, primarily Italy, he became involved in a larger operation, the counterfeiting of currency to fund terrorist activities across the Middle East. In 2001, Hashimi was arrested in Italy for his role in a massive counterfeiting ring that produced fake euros. It was a major blow to his network, but Hashimi's ability to outwit authorities had already become evident. While in custody, he displayed a remarkable calmness, manipulating his surroundings to his advantage. He used his detention as a means to solidify his contacts within the militant world, even using his time behind bars to coordinate operations through encrypted messages. Hashimi's arrest, however, did not signal the end of his criminal career. It marked the beginning of his evolution into a more sophisticated and dangerous player. Upon release in 2003, Hashimi expanded his operation, shifting focus from small-time counterfeiting to a more organized global financial network. The scale of his crimes expanded dramatically. He became involved in laundering money from drug trade proceeds, illicit arms deals, and even kidnapping ransoms. Each operation was tied directly to Hamas, fueling the group's military endeavors while avoiding direct detection. Hashimi's ability to operate across borders, circumventing international law enforcement, would become a trademark of his career. A true shadow figure whose every move was calculated, precise, and deadly. In 2003, after his release from the Italian prison, Raza Hashimi did not merely return to his old ways. Instead, he began to transform the very nature of his operations. His brief time behind bars had been an education, one in manipulation, survival, and ideological fortification. While incarcerated, Hashimi was subjected to harsh interrogations, a method of extraction commonly used by the intelligence agencies of several Western countries. His resilience during this period solidified his belief in the cause, and he would later claim that the experience had only strengthened his resolve. Hashimi became obsessed with the notion of suffering as a means of gaining strength, a twisted philosophy he shared with certain figures within the Islamic world. He spoke of his time in prison as the crucible, in which he was forged into a hardened revolutionary. The physical and psychological tolls of his confinement led to a deepening of his radical beliefs, and he would later use his narrative of victimhood as a powerful recruitment tool, especially among younger militants who saw him as both a martyr and a leader. And it was during this period of ideological reinforcement that Hashimi began refining his leadership style, viewing himself not as a mere operative, but as an architect of a broader geopolitical vision. The suffering he endured would become, in his mind, a means to justify further brutality against those he saw as enemies of Islam. In the years following his release from prison, Raza Hashimi's influence grew exponentially as he became involved with several key groups within the broader jihadist movement. His connections within Europe and the Middle East allowed him to network with figures from Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, and other militant organizations, eventually leading him to work more closely with Hamas. His role in the organization, however, was not limited to logistical support. It was within Hamas that he began to carve out his own power base, using his growing wealth from counterfeiting and arms smuggling to position himself as a key financial backer. Hashimi's deep understanding of international financial systems allowed him to navigate the complexities of laundering money, making him indispensable to the Hamas leadership. He established a network of shadowy front companies through which he funneled funds, weapons, and even personnel into Gaza and the West Bank. His involvement with Hamas was not just about facilitating violence, but about creating an ecosystem of financial sustainability for the group. He understood that without a steady stream of resources, even the most powerful militant groups could fall apart. In the early 2000s, Hashimi co-founded a covert operations unit within Hamas, dedicated to expanding the group's influence outside of the Middle East. He helped to secure financing for training camps in Lebanon and Syria, and facilitated the smuggling of explosives and military-grade equipment. His deep understanding of the global financial system made him a critical player in Hamas's long-term strategy, one that transcended mere physical warfare and embraced financial and ideological subversion. By 2006, Hashimi's growing role within the organization made him a key figure in its global operations. But his rise within Hamas came with consequences. His newfound prominence meant that Hashimi became a target for intelligence agencies across the world, especially those of Israel and the United States. As his financial empire expanded, so too did the pressure to neutralize him. And soon, the hunt for Raza Hashimi was on in full force. By 2007, Raza Hashimi's activities had evolved into a complex and deadly network of operations that spanned multiple continents. His rise through Hamas had allowed him to tap into a variety of illicit networks, including those involved in smuggling weapons, drugs, and even people. The methods he employed were ruthlessly efficient. Arms shipments were disguised as humanitarian aid. Drugs were laundered through shell companies, and hostages were taken for ransom in exchange for millions, money that would be funneled directly into Hamas's coffers. One of Hashimi's key contributions to Hamas was the evolution of the group's kidnapping operations. He orchestrated high-profile abductions, not only to finance the organization, but also as a means of exerting political pressure on governments around the world. The most notorious of these was the 2008 kidnapping of an Israeli businessman in Rome, which sent shockwaves through Europe and heightened Israel's sense of urgency in dealing with Hashimi. The businessman, a known arms dealer, was held hostage for nearly 6 months. Hashimi personally oversaw the negotiations, using the opportunity to showcase his influence and to broker weapons deals in exchange for the victim's release. Simultaneously, Hashimi facilitated the smuggling of explosives into Israel and the Palestinian territories, personally overseeing the transportation of materials via tunnels and covert routes. His ability to evade intelligence agencies, combined with his knowledge of European and Middle Eastern infrastructure, made him an extraordinarily difficult target. His network of sleeper cells and hidden caches of weaponry made him a formidable opponent, one who operated with an unsettling sense of impunity. His hands, however, were far from clean. Hashimi personally signed off on several assassinations of high-ranking officials within rival factions, as well as bombings that took the lives of civilians. These acts of terror only served to increase his reputation as a figure not to be underestimated. Raza Hashimi's ascent through the ranks of global terrorism was marked by a series of meticulously planned, high-profile incidents that shaped the trajectory of his operations. Each of these events, though distinct, was connected by one core principle: the use of violence and terror as tools to achieve both ideological and financial power. By the late 2000s, Hashimi's operations had evolved into a complex web, with each node interconnected. His smuggling routes, his financial backers, and his militant operatives all operating in a manner that allowed him to stay several steps ahead of his enemies. In 2009, Hashimi masterminded the bombing of a commercial Israeli cargo ship in the Mediterranean. The attack was not only a demonstration of his network's operational reach, but also a clear signal to Israel that Hashimi's group had moved from simple sabotage to full-scale warfare. This incident marked a significant escalation, as it introduced maritime sabotage as a new front in the ongoing conflict. The attack, though claimed by Hamas, was orchestrated through Hashimi's European network. The ship's cargo, military-grade weaponry destined for Israel, was destroyed, sending a wave of fear across international shipping lanes. In 2011, Hashimi was linked to the assassination of a senior Palestinian Authority official in Ramallah. The killing, carried out by a Hamas cell, was part of an ongoing power struggle between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, but it also served Hashimi's larger purpose: to destabilize the region and create chaos. His operatives used highly sophisticated techniques, including poison and encrypted communications, to carry out the mission without leaving a trace. The victim's death was followed by a series of bombings across the West Bank, which further fueled the flames of sectarian violence. By 2013, Hashimi had orchestrated a network of assassinations targeting former militants who had turned informant or had become too closely aligned with the West. Each murder was a calculated move to silence anyone who might expose his operations or disrupt his financial empire. Hashimi's name was now synonymous with both terror and control, his reach extending far beyond the Middle East, a global player in the shadowy world of terrorism. By the mid-2010s, Raza Hashimi had earned his place among the world's most dangerous men. His name became synonymous with international terrorism, financial crime, and ruthless political manipulation. As the scale of his operations grew, so too did the efforts of intelligence agencies around the globe to neutralize him. Hashimi had long since ceased being a mere financier for Hamas. He had evolved into a symbol of the transnational jihadist movement. His ability to fund, organize, and execute complex terrorist operations made him an invaluable asset to Hamas, but also a prime target for international law enforcement and intelligence agencies. In 2014, the United States Department of Treasury officially designated Hashimi as a specially designated global terrorist, SDGT, placing him on the U.S. government's most wanted list. Soon after, the European Union and the United Nations followed suit, freezing his assets and blacklisting him across multiple jurisdictions. The Israeli government, with its unparalleled intelligence capabilities, began to track his movements relentlessly. But Hashimi's ability to remain under the radar, thanks to his meticulous planning, use of fake identities, and extensive network of safe houses, made him elusive. His operations were dispersed across multiple continents, making it nearly impossible for any single agency to track him without stepping on the toes of others. Hashimi's name was whispered in the corridors of power, his influence stretching from the back rooms of European banks to the front lines of Gaza. Every time a new attack took place in Israel or a Western city, fingers pointed toward Hashimi, even if his involvement was never fully proven. His financial empire became a tool of terror, funding everything from small cell attacks to large-scale bombings. And yet, even as the net closed in on him, Hashimi's ability to hide behind layers of intermediaries and false identities allowed him to remain a shadow, slipping through the cracks just as authorities thought they had him cornered. This cat-and-mouse game with international intelligence agencies would continue for several more years, with each failed attempt to apprehend him adding to his growing mystique and legend. The more the world hunted him, the more his power seemed to grow. Hashimi was no longer just a man. He had become an idea, a ghost whose very existence defied the global order. The relentless pursuit of Raza Hashimi did not go unnoticed by him. If anything, it sharpened his instincts and deepened his resolve. In the years following his designation as a terrorist financier, Hashimi became the target of numerous assassination attempts orchestrated by various international intelligence agencies, all of whom sought to eliminate him before he could inflict even greater damage. Yet, Hashimi proved to be an elusive quarry, an enigma who seemed to anticipate every move made against him. The first serious attempt on his life came in 2016, when Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency, launched a covert operation to capture or eliminate him. A team of elite operatives had tracked Hashimi to a remote villa in northern Syria, where he was believed to be coordinating weapons shipments into Gaza. With precise intelligence, Mossad operatives launched a strike on the compound. But when the dust settled, Hashimi was nowhere to be found. The operation, which had been a well-orchestrated attempt to deliver a fatal blow to Hamas's financial infrastructure, ended in failure. It became clear that Hashimi's ability to evade capture was not simply the result of good luck, but the product of years of planning and caution. In 2017, the CIA, working in close cooperation with Israeli intelligence, tried a different approach. They attempted to poison Hashimi while he was attending a high-level meeting in Lebanon with a senior Hamas official. The plan was executed with precision. Hashimi's food and drink were laced with a deadly toxin. Yet, in a move that would forever haunt his would-be assassins, Hashimi had already anticipated such an attempt. Months before, he had started taking a counteracting regimen of medications that rendered the poison ineffective. The CIA, devastated by the failure, began to question whether they would ever be able to strike down the figure that had become so elusive, so untouchable. Then, in 2019, a joint operation between several European intelligence agencies aimed to ambush Hashimi during a secretive meeting in Milan. For weeks, a team of operatives surveilled the area, waiting for the right moment to strike. They knew that Hashimi's habit of using multiple aliases and disguises meant that he could be anyone in the room, but their patience was wearing thin. On the night of the operation, Hashimi arrived, unrecognizable, hidden behind the guise of an innocuous businessman. But as the agents closed in, they found nothing. Hashimi had slipped through the net once more. These failed attempts only further cemented Hashimi's status as a living legend, an untouchable figure who had outsmarted the world's most sophisticated intelligence agencies. However, with each failed mission, it was clear that the stakes were escalating. Whoever captured or killed Hashimi would not only deal a blow to Hamas, but would change the balance of power in the Middle East. The hunt was no longer just about a single man. It had become a high-stakes geopolitical contest, one that few were willing to lose. By the time of Hashimi's death in December 2020, there was an undeniable sense of inevitability surrounding his fate. Every failed assassination attempt, every close call, had only prolonged the tension, building a sense that it was not if, but when, the world would finally close in on him. The forces that hunted him were not just intelligence agencies, they were entire nations, each with their own stake in the fight against the threat that Hashimi represented. For Israel, capturing or killing Hashimi would cripple Hamas's financial backbone and send a resounding message to other jihadist organizations. For the United States, his death would serve as a victory in the ongoing war against terror, dealing a blow to one of the most elusive and dangerous figures in modern history. And yet, even as the noose tightened, Hashimi's reputation only grew. His name was spoken in hushed tones, whispered in corridors of power, and feared in the dark corners of militant circles. It became clear that the global hunt for Hashimi was no longer just a matter of eliminating a terrorist. It was about undoing the very fabric of a covert war that had been waged for decades. His death would mark the conclusion of a dangerous chapter in the ongoing struggle, but it would also leave a vacuum, one that would fuel further conflict. Raza Hashimi's life and death were inexorably tied to the larger geopolitical conflicts that shaped the Middle East and the wider world throughout the 21st century. His rise within Hamas was not an isolated event. It was part of a broader ideological struggle, one that spanned the globe involving religious extremism, territorial disputes, and the battle for ideological dominance between various factions of political Islam. At the heart of this conflict was the Israeli-Palestinian issue, a simmering source of violence that had persisted for over half a century. Hamas, founded in 1987 as an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, had positioned itself as the radical vanguard of Palestinian resistance, vehemently opposing Israel's existence and advocating for armed struggle. Hashimi's financial empire, built through counterfeiting, arms smuggling, and global money laundering, was an essential lifeline for Hamas, enabling the group to fund its operations, recruit militants, and acquire weapons. As the group's influence grew, so too did the scale of violence across the Middle East. The wars in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, the rise of ISIS, and the increasing entanglement of regional powers, all of these played into the hands of Hamas and other jihadist factions, providing both cover and opportunities for Hashimi's financial and logistical network to thrive. Beyond the Middle East, Hashimi's operations also found fertile ground in Europe, where he used the continent's financial systems as a means to funnel millions of dollars into terrorist activities. The European Union, still reeling from the effects of the 2004 Madrid bombings and the 2015 Paris attacks, had become a key theater in the fight against radicalization and terrorism. Hashimi's ability to operate within this space, moving freely between Italy, Spain, and France, highlighted a key vulnerability in Europe's counter-terrorism efforts: the difficulty of policing the complex intersection between global finance and regional militancy. To fully understand the geopolitical ramifications of Hashimi's death, one must examine the global alignments that shaped his rise. On one side stood the United States, Israel, and many European powers, all united in their fight against Islamic terrorism. On the other, an array of nations in the Middle East and North Africa, including Iran and Qatar, were accused of providing financial support to groups like Hamas. This Cold War between ideological factions, each with its own vision of the future, provided the perfect environment for figures like Hashimi to emerge and thrive. As Hashimi's financial influence spread, so did the shadow of violence. His activities were part of a broader struggle for control of the Middle East, a struggle that had by the 2010s reached a boiling point. Whether he was facilitating the war efforts in Syria, laundering money for Hezbollah, or planning attacks against Israeli targets, Hashimi's work was at the epicenter of a complex, multi-layered conflict that was reshaping the political landscape of the entire region. The geopolitical landscape that shaped Raza Hashimi's rise was characterized by sharp divisions, with each major player pursuing its own interests in a region defined by volatility and shifting alliances. At the heart of this complex web were the long-standing rivalries between Sunni and Shia powers, as well as the deepening divides between Western democracies and authoritarian regimes in the Middle East. For countries like Israel, the United States, and Saudi Arabia, combating the rise of radical Islamist factions such as Hamas was a central component of their foreign policy, driven by security concerns and a desire to maintain regional stability. For these nations, Hashimi's rise as a key financial operator for Hamas was a direct threat to their security interests. Israel, in particular, viewed Hamas as an existential threat, one that sought not only to disrupt its territorial integrity, but to annihilate the Jewish state entirely. Hashimi, as a central figure in Hamas's international operations, was seen as a prime target for elimination. The Israeli intelligence community, particularly Mossad, devoted considerable resources to tracking Hashimi's movements, as his financial support of Hamas allowed the group to purchase weapons and carry out devastating attacks on Israeli soil. For Israel, every attack against its civilians was a stark reminder of the stakes at play, and Hashimi's death would represent a major victory in the war against terrorism. On the other hand, nations like Iran and Qatar had long been accused of providing vital support to Hamas. Iran, a Shia majority power, saw in Hamas, a Sunni Islamist organization, a valuable partner in the broader resistance against Israeli influence in the region. Hashimi's ability to secure financing for Hamas through both legitimate and illicit channels meant that he was indispensable in Tehran's broader strategy of regional destabilization. Similarly, Qatar, with its soft power diplomacy, provided a safe haven for many Hamas operatives, even hosting senior members of the group on occasion. Qatar's role in the region was one of complex diplomacy, often walking a fine line between supporting Islamist groups like Hamas and maintaining relations with the West. The United States, meanwhile, had long made the fight against terrorism a central pillar of its foreign policy, especially after the September 11th attacks. Under both Bush and Obama administrations, the U.S. placed immense pressure on both its allies and adversaries to curb the rise of groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, and al-Qaeda. However, Hashimi's death was a paradox for the U.S. While he was undoubtedly a target of American counterterrorism efforts, his demise, orchestrated by another power, meant that the U.S. had limited involvement in the operation itself. This left the U.S. in a delicate diplomatic position, where its alliances with Israel and other Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia were at odds with its broader efforts to negotiate with more moderate actors in the region. The broader Middle Eastern conflict, with its shifting alliances and conflicting priorities, created a fractured environment where Hashimi could thrive. His connections to both Sunni and Shia factions allowed him to operate in spaces where many others could not, navigating a path that kept him hidden from both Western and regional authorities alike. Raza Hashimi's death would be a significant event, but it was not an isolated one. To understand why his figure mattered so much in the larger context of the Middle East and global terrorism, one must first consider the role he played in the evolution of modern jihadist movements and the financial networks that sustain them. Hashimi was not simply a militant. He was an architect of the global infrastructure that allowed groups like Hamas to operate on the world stage. His ability to move money, people, and weapons across borders with near impunity made him a linchpin in the international network of terror finance. Hashimi's significance was not merely in his direct connections to Hamas. It was in the broader impact his financial operations had on militant movements worldwide. He was a prime example of the growing intersection between terrorism and organized crime, a figure who had turned financial expertise into a weapon for ideological warfare. The network he created was sophisticated and multifaceted, weaving together counterfeit currencies, illegal arms trades, and black market oil dealings. By financing terrorist activities from Europe to the Middle East, Hashimi created an invisible bridge between the world's financial systems and the chaos of conflict zones. This made him a target for international intelligence agencies, not just because of his ties to Hamas, but because of his role in sustaining global terrorism at a systemic level. His death, then, symbolized a shift in the power dynamics of the Middle East. Hamas, already a fractured organization in the wake of Arab Spring revolutions and increasing Israeli military pressure, would now face a new set of challenges without Hashimi's financial lifeline. But his absence would also create a vacuum that could very well be filled by other opportunistic figures, a reminder of the enduring power of militant movements and the fragility of regional peace efforts. Moreover, Hashimi's role highlighted a larger truth about modern terrorism. It is no longer merely about ideology or battlefield victories. As Hashimi's career demonstrated, the battle for hearts and minds is inseparable from the battle for resources. Whether it was by funding suicide bombings or financing arms shipments to militant groups, Hashimi proved that financial warfare was as crucial as military power in shaping the trajectory of conflicts. His death would not only create a void in the financial networks of Hamas, but it would also underscore a chilling reality. The war on terrorism is one that cannot be won through military action alone. It requires an intricate understanding of global finance, covert intelligence, and the ability to track and disrupt a web of illicit activities that, like Hashimi's, may be hidden in plain sight. The operation to eliminate Raza Hashimi began long before the fateful day he would board a flight from Milan to Dubai. Mossad, Israel's elite intelligence agency, had been tracking him for years. His movements, once seemingly unpredictable, had grown more routine, and the growing network of human intelligence and surveillance assets in Europe began to close in on him. Hashimi, despite his careful habits, had made a misstep. He had booked a flight that would lead him through one of the most heavily monitored airports in the world, Milan's Malpensa Airport. The operatives assigned to this mission were experts in the art of subtlety, blending into their surroundings as easily as shadows slip through the night. They arrived in Italy under false identities, each one meticulously prepared to execute their task with surgical precision. Their aliases had been cleared months in advance, and their rented apartments were near the airport, giving them ample time to prepare for the strike. This was not the first time Mossad had targeted a high-profile individual, and it would not be the last. The operatives knew that Hashimi's capture or death had to be swift, clean, and imperceptible. Every moment was calculated, and every detail was carefully crafted. Surveillance teams, embedded across the airport, were prepared to watch his every move, ready to spring into action the moment he set foot on the tarmac. But the key to this operation was its secrecy. Mossad understood that, to succeed, they needed to strike with such precision that there would be no trace left behind, nothing that could tie the assassination back to Israel. The stakes could not have been higher, and failure was not an option. As the operatives arrived in Milan under their assumed identities, they wasted no time settling into their meticulously planned positions. Mossad's surveillance network in Milan was extensive, with agents embedded across various parts of the city, from busy tourist spots to the quieter corners where they could track Hashimi's movements without drawing attention. The team's first task was to identify his final destination, Dubai. This was where the operation would reach its apex. Dubai, a city of opulence and global trade, also offered the perfect camouflage. Its sprawling hotels and complex transport networks would make it easier for the operatives to blend in and make their move. Hashimi's flight had already been traced through multiple intelligence channels. The Mossad agents knew which flight he had booked, which terminal he would pass through, and even the specific gate he would arrive at. But the next phase involved an intricate game of cat and mouse. As Hashimi checked into his hotel in Milan, his every movement was carefully observed. He was unaware that his every action was being recorded by a team of operatives who followed him from the moment he stepped off the plane. The hotel he chose was a five-star establishment on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where people like Hashimi could easily disappear into the crowd of business travelers and wealthy guests. The Mossad team had already infiltrated the hotel's staff, ensuring that no unusual activity could be spotted by the hotel's security. Hashimi, ever the professional, remained vigilant, but the presence of Mossad's eyes across Milan ensured that he was always under observation. Every time he left his hotel room, every phone call he made, and every document he handled were silently documented. For the operatives, this phase of the operation was just as critical as the final strike. They needed to understand Hashimi's routines, predict his next move, and ensure that the team was ready to act with flawless timing. The morning of the operation dawned cold and clear. In Milan, the city's morning routine unfolded like any other. Traffic moving, cafes bustling with commuters, and the hum of daily life masking the tension building behind closed doors. In one of the quieter rooms of the hotel where Raza Hashimi was staying, the Mossad team began their final preparations. By this time, all the intelligence had been gathered, all the surveillance conducted, and the plan was set in motion. Hashimi's flight to Dubai was scheduled for noon. At 9 a.m., he checked out of his hotel, seemingly unaware that his every move was being monitored. Mossad agents, who had embedded themselves within the hotel staff, watched as Hashimi, wearing his signature dark suit, moved confidently through the lobby and out into the cool morning air. The operative's eyes followed him from a distance, ensuring no slip-ups would occur. Each agent had a designated position. Some were stationed in the hotel's rear exit, others along the streets near the airport, while a select few had positioned themselves within the terminal itself. By 10 a.m., Hashimi was en route to Malpensa Airport, escorted by a team of his own bodyguards. This was the moment the Mossad team had been waiting for. They had already infiltrated airport security, ensuring that Hashimi's access to the gates was unobstructed and his surveillance would be entirely on Mossad's terms. As he made his way through the terminal, passing by cafes and duty-free shops, the operatives waited. Hashimi's security detail was alert, but there was little to signal any immediate danger. At 11:45 a.m., the operatives received confirmation. Hashimi had checked into his flight. As soon as he entered the security line, the agents moved into their final positions, positioning themselves along his path in ways that allowed them to remain unseen, but within striking distance. The team's commander, observing the entire operation from a secure location, gave the final order: move. Just moments before Hashimi reached the boarding gate, Mossad's agent, posing as an airport employee, stepped forward, blocking the path of his bodyguards under the guise of routine security measures. As Hashimi turned to face the slight interruption, a different operative, one who had blended seamlessly into the crowded terminal, moved in swiftly. The kill shot was executed with cold precision. There was no panic, no shouting, just the sharp crack of a silenced weapon and the sudden collapse of a man whose name had echoed in intelligence circles for over a decade. Hashimi's bodyguards were left stunned, too late to react. The Mossad agents, blending back into the crowds, moved away as if they had never been there. The airport returned to its normal buzz, and within minutes, all traces of the operation had been erased. No one noticed the ghost had been eliminated. The assassination of Raza Hashimi, while swift and effective, was not the result of brute force or reckless violence. It was the culmination of years of meticulous planning, a delicate orchestration where every tool and technique was chosen for its efficiency and precision. Mossad, known for its cold, clinical approach to such high-risk operations, employed a range of sophisticated tools to ensure the mission's success. The first and most critical tool was the silenced weapon, a lightweight, easily concealable firearm designed for quick, silent execution. The weapon was customized with a suppressor, reducing the noise to a near whisper, allowing the assassin to eliminate Hashimi without alerting nearby civilians or security personnel. The weapon's design made it perfect for close-range use, where speed and surprise were paramount. Alongside the firearms, Mossad operatives relied on a range of high-tech gadgets to ensure the operation ran smoothly. Communication was key. Encrypted radio systems allowed the agents to remain in constant contact with each other, despite the busy environment of the airport. The team used secure earpieces to relay information in real time, with minimal risk of interception. A small but crucial piece of equipment was the facial recognition software integrated into the operatives' devices. Using surveillance cameras positioned around the terminal, they were able to track Hashimi's exact movements, anticipating his path and adjusting their positioning accordingly. The final tool, however, was the element of surprise. Mossad operatives had infiltrated every corner of the airport, from the baggage claim area to the security checkpoints. The confusion and chaos that would follow Hashimi's death were all part of the plan. When the kill was executed, the operatives melted into the environment, slipping away as unnoticed as they had arrived. The perfect execution of an operation where no one knew the danger until it was far too late. As the seconds ticked down, the tension in the air was almost palpable, yet it felt like a scene from a spy thriller, an artfully choreographed dance of surveillance, anticipation, and control. The Mossad operatives, positioned like chess pieces on the grand airport stage, watched as Hashimi approached his final destination. His bodyguards, unaware of the looming danger, moved with a sense of routine, confidence in their own training, but oblivious to the fact that their entire world was about to collapse in one fluid, near-invisible motion. In a moment of eerie stillness, a signal flashed. A masked agent, one among the many unassuming travelers, stepped forward as if his movement was no more remarkable than a passerby buying coffee. With perfect timing, he blocked the path of Hashimi's security detail. The target turned, his gaze narrowing in confusion, just a beat too late. The assassin's hand moved like lightning, the weapon firing a single quiet shot that punctuated the tense silence. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, as Hashimi's body crumpled to the floor, chaos erupted around him. His bodyguards rushed to his side, but by the time they could react, the Mossad operatives had already melted into the background. The illusion was complete. An assassination so clean, so precise, it seemed like an unseen hand had just erased the ghost. In that moment, Hashimi ceased to be. His death was neither dramatic nor loud. It was the echo of an unstoppable force closing in. Raza Hashimi's final moments were brief, yet they marked the end of an era. As the bullet pierced his chest, the man who had evaded multiple assassination attempts, outwitted intelligence agencies, and orchestrated numerous deadly operations, finally crumpled to the ground. His bodyguards, too late to react, were left helpless in the wake of the operation. In the split second it took for Hashimi's life to slip away, he was reduced to another casualty in the long, brutal war on terror, a man whose name had once carried the weight of an entire militant infrastructure, now falling in the most mundane way possible. The assassin, never seen, never identified, moved back into the crowd with the same speed and anonymity with which he had approached the target. A mere blur in the sea of travelers, indistinguishable from anyone else. Hashimi's death, though significant, passed almost unnoticed by the average person at the airport, whose attention had already turned elsewhere. It was only the keen observers, the ones who understood what had just transpired, who would recognize that this wasn't just another casualty of a violent conflict. In less than a minute, the operation was over. The room, once filled with the weight of Hashimi's presence, was empty. His body lay lifeless on the cold terminal floor, a final reminder of how quickly even the most elusive can be erased from history. When the first airport staff member discovered Raza Hashimi's body, lying in an eerily unnatural position near the gates, it was initially dismissed as a medical emergency. But as the realization set in, the initial confusion turned into panic. The high-profile nature of the victim soon became clear. An anonymous man in a suit had been found dead, and his identity was confirmed through the several intelligence channels monitoring him. A quick scan of his passport revealed that the body was indeed Hashimi, the infamous Hamas financier and mastermind. The scene quickly spiraled into chaos. Emergency responders arrived, but there was no attempt at resuscitation. Hashimi was beyond saving. His body was cordoned off, and the airport became a flurry of activity as the local authorities scrambled to investigate what had just happened. At first, no one seemed to know who was responsible, and the identity of Hashimi as the target of a carefully planned assassination did not emerge until later in the investigation. As word of his death spread across the global intelligence community, a flood of questions erupted. Who had carried out the hit? What had led to this moment? And most importantly, why now? The answers would not come easily, but the global web of espionage and counterterrorism agencies would soon begin to piece together the story behind this carefully executed assassination. In the hours following Raza Hashimi's assassination, an autopsy was conducted, but it did little to unravel the mystery of who had ordered the strike. The coroner's report confirmed what was already clear. Hashimi had been shot at close range with a single bullet to the chest, the trajectory and wound pattern indicating a precise, well-planned hit. The fatal shot had been delivered by a silenced weapon, which explained why no one in the crowded terminal had heard a thing. There was no sign of a struggle, no defensive wounds, just the sudden violence of a bullet ripping through flesh and bone. Yet, the medical findings didn't end there. Hashimi's body also revealed traces of a sedative in his system, suggesting that he had been drugged before the final shot was fired. It was a calculated move, a way to disorient him, slow his reflexes, and ensure that he couldn't escape or fight back. Whoever had orchestrated the assassination had left nothing to chance, even down to the chemicals introduced into his bloodstream. It became increasingly clear that the kill had been meticulously planned, and Hashimi had been rendered utterly vulnerable in his final moments. The autopsy further confirmed that Hashimi had been in top physical condition, which only added to the sense of cold calculation behind his death. This was not a random act of violence. It was the product of a methodical and skilled operation, one that had been years in the making. As investigators began to piece together the details of Raza Hashimi's assassination, they turned to the airport's extensive CCTV network, hoping the cameras might provide vital clues. The footage, though grainy and fragmented in places, revealed a chilling scene. Hashimi had moved through the terminal in a predictable fashion, his security detail close behind him, but unaware of the danger that was already in motion. However, what caught the investigators' attention was the footage of a seemingly unremarkable figure, an individual in a black jacket who had been near Hashimi just moments before the shooting. This individual, seemingly blending into the crowd, was caught on several cameras, moving in close to Hashimi just before he collapsed. The assassin's face was never clearly visible, but his calm demeanor and purposeful steps spoke volumes to the experienced eyes of the investigators. The team working the case was struck by the efficiency of the operation. The assassin had struck quickly and disappeared into the crowded terminal before anyone could react. But the true shock came when investigators examined Hashimi's passport. It had been meticulously forged. No one had expected this level of preparation. The passport, bearing Hashimi's name but featuring doctored information, had allowed him to travel with a degree of anonymity that intelligence agencies had failed to detect. As the investigation continued, it became clear that whoever had orchestrated the hit had also gone to great lengths to create a false identity for Hashimi, knowing that his true identity would only be uncovered after his death. The passport scandal would reverberate globally, as it revealed the lengths to which those responsible for Hashimi's assassination had gone to keep the operation clean and undetected. It also raised serious questions about the vulnerabilities within international security systems, vulnerabilities that could easily be exploited by shadowy figures with the resources to conceal their tracks. As the news of Raza Hashimi's assassination spread, the geopolitical reverberations were immediate and intense. The operation, executed with such precision, left the international community in shock, as no one had expected such a high-profile target to be eliminated with such relative ease. Governments scrambled to respond. Israel, as one of the most obvious suspects behind the operation, initially refrained from making any public statements. Despite its close ties to Mossad, the Israeli government maintained its usual policy of neither confirming nor denying involvement in such covert actions. On the other hand, Hamas reacted with a mix of fury and confusion. Hashimi had been a central figure in the group's operations, and his loss sent ripples of fear through its leadership. His assassination was not just a personal blow, it was a crippling financial setback for the organization, leaving it vulnerable in the short term. Hamas issued a statement vowing revenge, accusing Israel of orchestrating the hit, but they struggled to mount any significant counteraction. Their response seemed disjointed, as internal chaos gripped the organization in the wake of Hashimi's death. Meanwhile, Western governments, particularly the United States and European Union, were forced into a delicate diplomatic dance. While they too were involved in the covert war on terrorism, the nature of the assassination left many uncomfortable. The precision of the operation indicated a well-organized state actor, but if it was Mossad, it raised further questions about the use of extrajudicial killings on foreign soil. Several diplomats began to issue statements calling for greater transparency and the need for international cooperation in combating terrorism, but behind closed doors, the real fear was more tactical. The assassination of Hashimi had fundamentally changed the balance of power in the Middle East. For those who had tracked Hashimi's movements for years, the death of such a significant figure represented a temporary victory. But as history had shown, killing a man like Hashimi was unlikely to end the conflict. It would only fuel the fires of further retribution and open the door to new power struggles. The immediate fallout was one of political instability and heightened tension across the region, a mere prelude to the unpredictable consequences that were yet to come. The assassination of Raza Hashimi was not just a singular event. It was a haunting reminder of the shadowy bureaucracies that operate in the dark corners of global power. Behind every covert operation, behind every carefully executed mission, lies an invisible network of intelligence agencies, diplomats, and military operatives who make it all possible. These entities work in secret, with little accountability or transparency, their actions often obscured by the veneer of national security. The true depth of their involvement is buried beneath layers of bureaucracy, classified documents, and whispered meetings in hidden chambers. Hashimi's death was the result of such a network, a web of intelligence operatives, international agreements, and shadowy power plays between states. It was a silent, methodical execution carried out by those whose identities will never be fully known, whose motivations will never be completely revealed. The true architects of his death are invisible to the public eye, as are the motivations that drove them. What we know of them is often the result of speculation and the rare, grainy leaks that trickle through the cracks of classified walls. The bureaucracy that guided Hashimi's assassination operated like a well-oiled machine. Each operative, each agent, each analyst worked in perfect synchronization with a singular goal in mind: the eradication of a man whose influence had spread across borders and who represented a direct threat to the global order. The true power of such operations lies not in the individuals who execute them, but in the structures that support them, allowing governments to bypass the conventional rules of engagement in the name of state security. Within the labyrinth of global intelligence, there are shadowy legions, elite units whose very existence is known to few. These are the agents who are tasked with executing the most delicate and high-risk operations, working far from the limelight and without fanfare. To the outside world, they are faceless operatives, their actions shrouded in secrecy, their names never to be revealed. Yet their impact is monumental, changing the course of history without so much as a whisper. In Mossad's ranks, these operatives are referred to simply as the ghosts, highly trained men and women who specialize in intelligence gathering, covert operations, and, when necessary, assassinations. They are experts in using the tools of deception, blending seamlessly into their surroundings and vanishing without a trace. Like mythical warriors, they are the silent titans who operate on behalf of the state, their allegiances hidden, their motives obscured. Their actions, although often deadly, are designed to shape geopolitics in a way that remains beyond public scrutiny. In contrast to the formalities of government bureaucracies and diplomacy, these legions function in a realm where the rules are flexible and the stakes are life and death. They answer to no one but the highest echelons of power, figures whose names may never be known but whose influence is vast, steering the course of nations from the shadows. The world of covert operations is built on a legacy of past missions that, while completed with deadly precision, often leave lingering questions and unresolved chapters. The successful assassination of Raza Hashimi was only the latest in a long series of operations executed by the shadowy intelligence agencies of the world. Each operation is a calculated risk, an invisible war fought behind closed doors, far from the eyes of the public. And though these actions may be forgotten by history, they are never truly over. Take, for example, the infamous Israeli operation that took down Mahmoud al-Mabhouh, a senior Hamas commander, in 2010. Al-Mabhouh's assassination in Dubai was carried out with surgical precision. Mossad agents infiltrated his hotel room, injected him with a lethal dose of poison, and disappeared without a trace, leaving nothing but confusion and whispers. The Dubai police were left with little more than blurry CCTV footage and a trail of false identities, as Mossad's agents slipped away into the ether. In the end, the murder of al-Mabhouh became a symbol of Mossad's ruthless efficiency, and yet, the true masterminds behind the operation remain unknown. Likewise, the death of Raza Hashimi was a reflection of a deeper, more chilling truth. These covert operations are not isolated incidents. They are part of an ongoing historical struggle. A struggle fought not only with weapons, but with misinformation, deception, and secrecy. These operations leave echoes in their wake, ghostly remnants of violence that never fully dissipate, always lingering in the dark recesses of international relations. The fallout from one operation leads to the next, creating a continuous cycle of violence, intrigue, and unseen manipulation. Behind the cold efficiency of operations like Hashimi's assassination lies a small cadre of decision-makers, elusive figures who pull the strings from the shadows. These individuals are the gods behind the curtain, the true architects of the covert wars fought in the name of national security. They are faceless, often nameless, and wield power in ways that render them untouchable. In the world of intelligence, they are the unseen masters, making decisions that shape the fate of nations, directing operations that erase lives without ever leaving a fingerprint. Their power lies in the silence of their decisions, in the anonymity that protects them from scrutiny. Raza Hashimi's funeral was a quiet affair, shrouded in secrecy, and held far from the prying eyes of the media. His family, close associates, and members of Hamas's leadership gathered in a private, undisclosed location, away from the tumultuous international spotlight. As with many figures in the world of clandestine warfare, the funeral was more a formality than a moment of public mourning. His death, while deeply significant to those within Hamas, was unlikely to lead to any public outpouring of grief. It was a cold, swift loss, a casualty of the ongoing conflict that for many was simply part of the cost of war. The immediate impact of his death was felt more deeply within the organization. Hamas, reeling from the sudden loss of its chief financial architect, was forced to reevaluate its operations. The financial empire Hashimi had built, spanning counterfeit currency, arms trading, and illicit financial networks, had been disrupted. A crucial pillar of Hamas's resistance to Israel was gone, but the group's leadership was not without resources. The vacuum left by Hashimi's assassination created a power struggle, with different factions scrambling to fill the void he had left behind. The organization's response was swift, a vow of vengeance, a message of defiance, but also a recognition of its newfound vulnerability. On a broader scale, the assassination sent shockwaves through the intelligence community. It was a clear signal. No one was safe, not even the most well-protected figures in the world of terrorism. The global counterterrorism apparatus had delivered a decisive blow, but the story did not end with Hashimi's death. It only set the stage for the next chapter in this unending cycle of violence and revenge. In the wake of Raza Hashimi's assassination, the long-term consequences rippled outward, reverberating across the Middle East and beyond. For Hamas, Hashimi's death marked the loss of an indispensable figure, one who had kept the group financially afloat and operational. His assassination exposed the fragility of militant networks that rely on a single individual to keep them running. While other leaders would attempt to take his place, the scale of his financial operations made it impossible for anyone to fill his shoes immediately. Hamas would soon find itself scrambling to find new sources of funding, and their operations became more erratic, less coordinated in the months that followed. But the loss of Hashimi did more than just destabilize Hamas. It marked a shift in the dynamics of global terrorism and state-sponsored violence. Mossad's success, while a victory for Israel and its allies, had also sent a powerful message to other groups operating outside the reach of traditional diplomacy. No one was beyond the reach of state power, not even the most elusive of militant financiers. Across the world, governments began to take note. The rules of engagement in the global fight against terrorism had been rewritten in the most brutal of terms. This was not a war that could be won solely with intelligence and diplomacy. It was a war of shadows, a war fought on the edge of geopolitics, where any target could be eliminated at a moment's notice. The lesson was clear. In this new world order, no one, whether an operative, a financier, or a leader, was truly untouchable. In the end, Raza Hashimi's death changed little in the grand scheme of geopolitics. But what it revealed was a hidden world, one where governments sanction killers, where covert operations are carried out without hesitation, and where lives are erased with a quiet finality that sends shockwaves across borders. The assassination was a mere chapter in a never-ending story of espionage and counterterrorism, a story where the lines between right and wrong are blurred beyond recognition. In this world, justice is not blind. It is wielded like a weapon. The truth remains buried, hidden in the shadows where power is forged and forgotten.